I keep a jar of other people's promises under my sewing table. That's the first sentence I've ever said that feels true enough to hurt. The jar is plain glass, the kind you'd use for sugar or flour, except it doesn't hold anything you could cook with. It holds tiny spools of thread, clipped ends, broken beads, scraps no bigger than a fingernail, things most people sweep into the trash without looking. In my shop, they glow faintly at night, like trapped fireflies that don't know how to die. If you're wondering whether I'm exaggerating, you've already stepped into the same lie I lived in for years, the lie that I'm rational, that I'm normal, that everything I do can be explained as simple skill. I'm a bridal tailor. That's what I tell people when they ask. It sounds harmless. Clean. Practical. The kind of work that smells like steamed fabric and lavender sachets, the kind of work that makes mothers cry and brides smile with their hands covering their mouths. They don't see the rest. They don't see how a wedding dress is never just a dress. It's a vessel. A container people pour themselves into. Fear. Hope. Childhood fantasies. The ache of being chosen. The terror of being known. And if you sit close enough, if you press your face near the seams, if you breathe the fabric and listen with your fingertips, you can feel what they poured in. I discovered that by accident. Years ago, a bride came in late, shaking, a week before her ceremony. The gown was too tight. The zipper refused to rise past her ribs like the dress itself didn't want to commit. She apologized so many times her voice started to sound like a prayer. "I'm sorry," she said, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to gain weight. I didn't mean to." I pinned the side seams and told her to breathe. I told her I'd fix it. I told her she was fine. That she was beautiful. The standard lines we all say to keep panic from spreading. But when she left, I sat alone with the dress on the form and did what I always do. I talked to the fabric as if it could hear me. "Don't hurt her," I whispered. "She's already hurting." That's when my needle snagged, just slightly, in the lining, like it had caught something invisible. I pulled it free and felt a strange warmth slide over my fingers, soft and sudden, like stepping into sunlight after weeks of rain. It startled me so much I froze. The warmth wasn't in the room. It wasn't in the lamp. It was in me. For a moment, I felt held. Not admired. Not tolerated. Held. I sat back, confused, my heart doing that small desperate stumble it does when it recognizes something it's been starving for. Then the feeling faded, leaving behind a hollowness so sharp it made my eyes water. I told myself it was exhaustion. I told myself I was being dramatic. Then I picked up the small clipped thread end I'd cut from the hem, just a loose tail, nothing special, and my fingertips tingled again, like the memory of warmth had been stored inside that thread. That was the beginning. It wasn't fireworks. It wasn't a voice in the room. It was small, almost humiliating, like the universe had decided to reveal itself through scraps. At first I tested it gently, the way you test ice before you step onto a frozen lake. A bead that had popped off a bodice during a fitting, warm, fluttery joy. A strip of lace trimmed away from a sleeve, a sweet ache, almost maternal. A broken hook from the inside of a corset, dread, thick and metallic. It didn't take long to understand what was happening. People left pieces of themselves behind in the work. The dress absorbed them. And when I altered the dress, when I cut, stitched, reshaped, I released those feelings into the air like perfume. And if I was close enough, I breathed them in. You might think that would make me compassionate. It did, for a while. I would feel a bride's fear before she admitted it. I would sense the tight knot of someone marrying a man she couldn't trust. I would smell the sharpness of a mother's control hidden beneath her compliments. I began to watch faces differently. I became careful with my words. But compassion is not what happens when you take feelings like they are yours. That's not compassion. That's hunger. I didn't grow up in a house where love was safe. It wasn't absent. That would have been simpler. Absence you can explain. No, love was present, but it was conditional, shaped like a contract. The kind of love that says, "I approve of you when you are useful." The kind of love that turns cold the moment you need anything messy. So I learned early to be low maintenance. Quiet. Competent. I learned to anticipate other people's needs so mine wouldn't have to exist. And I learned the most dangerous lesson of all: being loved felt like being watched. When someone said something tender to me, my body braced like a door being opened without permission. I didn't know how to relax into affection, I knew how to earn it, dodge it, survive it. So when that first warmth slid through my fingers from a stranger's dress, it felt like a cheat code: love without exposure. Comfort without risk. A sensation I could hold privately in my palm. I should have been afraid. Instead, I started collecting. It began innocently. I'd save a pretty button. Keep a bit of lace for future repairs. That's normal for my work. A good tailor never throws everything away. But my drawer filled faster than it should have. My pockets carried tiny scraps home. I labeled nothing, yet I remembered everything. That thread was devotion. That bead was relief. That ribbon was stubborn hope pretending to be certainty. On nights when my apartment felt too silent, when the walls seemed to lean inward with the weight of my own unspoken life, I would open the drawer and touch the pieces one by one. A little warmth. A little belonging. A little borrowed brightness. And then I bought the jar. At first, the jar was just a container. A place to keep my useful bits. But I noticed something: the longer I kept them, the more the scraps seemed to keep themselves. Not perfectly. Some dimmed over time, like feelings fading in memory. Some turned brittle, like vows that had been spoken without roots. But some glowed steadily, stubbornly, like a promise that meant it. The jar became my secret hearth. I would sit on the floor beside my sewing table late at night, lights off, and let the faint glow paint my hands. I'd press my palm to the glass and feel that soft warmth pulse back, like the jar was breathing. This is the part where I'm supposed to say I felt guilty. I didn't. Not at first. Because I wasn't stealing from anyone, not really. They were still getting married. Still wearing their gowns. Still walking into applause and photos and champagne. I wasn't undoing their happiness. I was just keeping what they dropped. That was my justification. It fit neatly inside my ribs like a folded note. Until Mara came in. Mara wasn't like the other brides. She didn't float. She didn't squeal. She didn't arrive with a loud mother and a squeaky entourage. She came alone. Hair pinned back. Eyes steady. Voice quiet in a way that wasn't timid, quiet like a person who learned not to waste sound. Her dress wasn't trendy. It was simple satin with clean lines and a long sleeve, like elegance stripped down to honesty. When she stepped onto my fitting platform, she didn't look at herself in the mirror the way most brides do. She looked at the floor, then at me. "I need this to fit," she said. "Not just on my body. On who I am." I laughed softly, trying to lighten it. "We'll make it perfect." She shook her head once. "Not perfect." True. That word landed between us like a stone dropped into still water. As I pinned the gown, my hands recognized something immediately: her dress was heavy with restraint. Not fear exactly. Something colder. Something like a person gripping the edge of a table to keep from trembling. I could feel it in the fabric, an old vow to not need, not ask, not collapse. And under that, deeper, there was something else: tenderness, locked away like jewelry in a box you never open because you don't trust the world not to steal it. When she stepped down, she said, "I'm sorry if I'm difficult." "You're not," I told her, and for once I meant it. After she left, I sat with the dress on the form and felt the ache in it. The satin seemed to hold its breath. I slid my hand along the seam and the feeling rose into me like smoke, a kind of love that had never been allowed to be soft. I should have been careful. But the hunger in me had grown teeth by then. I clipped a tiny strip from the inside, just a thread tail, barely anything, and felt warmth bloom, intense and precise, like a hand finally resting on your shoulder after years of flinching. My eyes stung. I took another small scrap, then another. The jar brightened that night more than it ever had. And in the glow, I made the most shameful discovery of my life: I didn't just want to feel love. I wanted to feel her love. Not because I desired Mara romantically. Not in the simple way stories like to package these things. I wanted her tenderness because it was rare, because it was earned, because it was guarded, and because it felt like proof that tenderness could exist without turning into a weapon. I became obsessed with getting the dress true. I reworked the sleeve carefully, reshaped the waist, adjusted the neckline by millimeters. But if I'm honest, part of me kept finding reasons to cut away tiny pieces. Each scrap fed the jar. Each scrap fed me. At the final fitting, Mara stood very still as I zipped her in. The gown fit beautifully. The satin lay against her like calm water. Her shoulders loosened for the first time, just a fraction. She looked at herself, finally. Her lips parted as if she wanted to say something, something tender, something real, and then she swallowed it. "You did good work," she said, voice controlled. "Thank you," I replied, smiling professionally. But inside, my chest hurt with something that had nothing to do with pride. Because I could feel the dress was lighter. Not physically. Something else. Like a room after someone leaves, when warmth is still in the air but the person is gone. I had taken too much. The next day was her wedding. I wasn't invited, of course. Tailors don't attend the endings. We exist in the before. But my shop is 2 streets from a small church, and that afternoon I heard the bells. I heard laughter spilling onto the road. I saw a few guests pass by my window in bright clothes, faces flushed with joy. I should have gone back to work. Instead, I opened the jar. The glow inside was beautiful. It pulsed softly, like something alive. And for a moment, standing there in my quiet shop, I felt full. Warm. Almost okay. Then, without warning, every light in the jar flickered. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't gradual. It was as if a wind had blown through the glass. One by one, the glowing scraps dimmed, turning gray, dull as dust. The warmth bled out of my palm. My throat tightened. I stared, confused, and then I understood with a sick clarity, the jar wasn't a battery. It wasn't a museum. It was a mirror of what was real. Love that was alive in the world glowed. Love that was breaking went dark. And somewhere, right now, in a church 2 streets away, something had shifted. I tried to tell myself it meant nothing. A coincidence. A temperature change. A ridiculous story I'd invented to cope with my own emptiness. But the fear in my body was older than logic. I set the jar down and ran. I don't know what I expected to do. Burst into the church? Scream a warning? Confess to strangers that I had been stealing warmth from fabric like a thief stealing bread? I didn't even make it inside. I reached the steps just as the doors, no, not doors, don't picture that, just as the entrance opened wide and people poured out, voices overlapping in confusion. Not shouting. Not panic. That quieter kind of shock, where everyone is trying to keep their dignity intact while something cracks beneath it. I saw Mara in the crowd. She wasn't crying. She wasn't dramatic. Her face was pale, eyes fixed, as if she had walked into a room and found the furniture rearranged while she wasn't looking. Her hands were clasped at her waist, gripping satin. A woman in a floral dress touched Mara's shoulder, speaking urgently. Mara nodded once, twice, like she understood words but couldn't let them enter. Then she looked up. And for a moment, her eyes met mine across the street. It shouldn't have meant anything. She didn't know me beyond fittings and pins and quiet professionalism. But in her gaze I felt something so sharp it almost knocked the breath out of me, recognition. Not of my face. Of the shape of my hunger. She didn't walk toward me. She didn't confront me. She simply turned and moved away, disappearing into the crowd like a person who finally chooses herself. I stood there, frozen, while the bells above the church continued to ring like they hadn't been told the plan changed. Back in my shop, the jar sat on the table like a punishment. Most of the scraps were dull now. A few still glimmered faintly. I reached in and touched one, desperate. Nothing. No warmth. No comfort. Only the dry whisper of fabric. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat beside the jar until dawn, watching it like it might forgive me if I stayed long enough. And the truth came, heavy and exact. I had built my life around a safe version of love, love I could hold without being seen. But love isn't safe when it's trapped. It either lives, or it rots. I thought my fear of being loved made me cautious, harmless, careful. But fear doesn't keep you pure. It just makes you clever at hiding damage. I realized I had treated intimacy like a resource, not a relationship. Like something to collect, store, ration. I had become a person who would rather steal warmth than ask for it honestly. And that's what fear of love really is. Not a delicate wound. A refusal. A quiet, stubborn refusal to risk being known. In the afternoon, I did the last thing my old self wanted. I opened the jar and dumped it out. The scraps spilled across the wooden table like pale confetti. Some were still faintly warm, as if confused, as if they didn't understand why they were being released. I took the largest piece of satin I'd kept, one I'd clipped from Mara's gown, hidden deep like a treasure, and held it between my fingers. I waited for warmth. It didn't come. Instead, I felt something else. Not magic. Not comfort. Grief. The simple human grief of realizing you can't hoard what was never meant to be owned. I gathered the scraps into a paper bag and walked them to the river path behind the shop. The water there is slow, not beautiful, not cinematic. Just water doing what water does, carrying things away without judgment. I don't know why I chose water. Maybe because it doesn't keep anything. Maybe because I wanted to practice letting go in the simplest possible way. I took a handful of thread ends and let them fall. They didn't glow as they drifted. They didn't shine like a lesson. They were just small pieces of someone else's life returning to the world. I stood there for a long time, hands empty. And then, like a cruel joke, I felt it, a warmth in my chest. Not from the scraps. From my own body. From the act of releasing. It was faint, but it was mine. That night I wrote a message I never sent. Not to Mara, she deserved peace, not my confession. I wrote it to myself, on a scrap of paper and pinned it above my sewing table. If you want love, you have to let it see you. I hate how simple it sounds. I hate how true it is. Because the real cost of fear isn't loneliness. It's distortion. It turns love into something you try to control. It turns tenderness into a threat. It turns your hands that could mend, into hands that take. I still alter wedding dresses. I still work late, under soft lamps, listening to fabric breathe under my fingers. But now, when I feel that familiar hunger, the urge to collect, to keep, to swallow someone else's warmth so I don't have to risk my own, I stop. I place both hands flat on the table and breathe until the craving loosens. And I do something small, but terrifying. I call someone. Not to perform. Not to be useful. Just to exist. I don't say much. Sometimes I just ask, "How are you really?" and then I let silence be silence without filling it with competence. Some days my body still flinches at kindness. Some days I still want love at a distance, filtered through cloth and glass. Fear doesn't vanish because you name it. But I'm learning that being loved isn't the same as being watched. Being loved is being met. And being met requires one thing I spent my whole life avoiding: showing up without armor. I don't have the jar anymore. The space under my sewing table is empty now, and on quiet nights, I still glance there out of habit, like my hunger expects to find a glow waiting for it. But when I find only darkness, I don't panic the way I used to. Because I finally understand, if the only love you can tolerate is the love you steal, you will never feel full, only briefly warmed, like hands held near a fire you refuse to sit beside. And if you want real warmth, the kind that lasts, you have to stop collecting scraps and start risking your own heart in the open air. That's my confession. I didn't fear love because I was fragile. I feared love because I knew what it would ask of me, to be seen, and not run. And I am still learning, night by night, stitch by stitch, that the bravest thing I can do is let my hands mend without taking, and let love touch me without turning it into something I can hide.